Could this be the nadir of American imitation? Arthur scribbled the question onto a cocktail napkin with a pen borrowed from the hotel, the words sharp and dismissive. He was Arthur Davies, after all, a name that carried weight in the hallowed halls of historical preservation in the United Kingdom. He was a surgeon of architecture, a man who could date a building by the tooling marks on its foundation stones. Tomorrow, his American wife, Eleanor, was dragging him to a place in the Virginia countryside called the New Avalon Heritage Village, and the very name felt like a gaudy costume, a cheap theatrical production of a history it had no right to claim. He was certain it would be a monument to counterfeit culture, an insult to the very concept of authenticity he had dedicated his life to. But when he stepped through its gates the next day, the world he knew, a world built on the bedrock of unshakable expertise, would not just tremble. It would fracture. The journey began 2 weeks prior, landing at Boston's Logan International Airport. Arthur, a man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and the perpetually weary eyes of someone who spends too much time lamenting the past, was in the States to deliver a series of lectures at Harvard. Beside him, Eleanor, an art historian with an infectious, quintessentially American optimism, saw history not as a fragile relic to be mourned, but as a living story to be shared. "Isn't this exciting, Arthur? A whole new world to explore," she had said, her voice bright against the airport's dull roar. "Yes, well, new is the operative word, isn't it?" he had replied, his tone dry as dust. They had journeyed through New England, a landscape Eleanor found charmingly historic and Arthur found recent. They saw clapboard houses and revolutionary battlefields. At each stop, Eleanor would marvel. "Can you imagine? Buildings from the 1700s, still standing so beautifully." Arthur would offer a professional, yet distant, assessment of the mortise and tenon joints or the sash windows, a flicker of appreciation for the craftsmanship, but it was always tempered by his internal monologue. "This is a child's history," he thought. "A fleeting chapter compared to the millennia etched into the stones of my home." His pride was a fortress, its walls built of York stone, and its mortar mixed with a quiet grief for the authentic past being bulldozed into oblivion back in Britain. On the 5th day of their trip south, a leisurely road trip down the spine of the East Coast, Eleanor unfolded a brochure she'd picked up at a visitor's center. They were cruising through the verdant, rolling hills of Virginia in a rented Lincoln sedan. "Arthur, tomorrow, we simply must go to the New Avalon Heritage Village," she announced, her eyes alight with discovery. The name hit Arthur's ear with a clang. "The New Avalon? Good heavens. That sounds dreadful. I assume it's some sort of Anglophilic theme park?" "It says it's a recreation of a historic English village. A living history museum. Look," she said, pointing to a glossy photo of a Tudor-style high street. "Doesn't that look lovely? It's a wonderful opportunity." Arthur let out a long, weary sigh, a sound he had perfected over 30 years of dealing with developers and city planners. "Eleanor, my love, you don't understand," he began, his voice laced with the patronizing patience of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a child. "How could Americans possibly replicate an English village? It'll be a pastiche, a caricature for tourists. Cheap plaster made to look like wattle and daub. Machine-cut timbers with fake ads marks. The brochure says it's officially endorsed by several British heritage societies," she countered, her optimism unwavering. He scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. "Endorsed? That's a commercial arrangement, a licensing fee. It doesn't mean they've captured its soul, it's veritas. You haven't even seen it, and you're already condemning it." Eleanor's tone had an edge now. "I don't need to," he said, turning his gaze to the passing Virginian landscape, so green and yet so alien. "I have spent my entire adult life studying English historical architecture. I know the story behind every brick, the meaning in the curve of every archway. That depth, that accumulated history, it's not something you can replicate with a blueprint and a budget. I guarantee you it will be nothing more than a superficial, soulless facsimile." Eleanor fell silent, knowing the impenetrable walls of his certainty. After they checked into a quaint inn in Charlottesville, she tried one last time. Just a quick visit tomorrow? Please? If you hate it, we can leave immediately. I promise. Arthur relented with a martyred sigh. Very well, but if I'm right, you can never again ask me to indulge in this sort of historical tourism. The next morning, under a hazy Virginia sun, they drove to New Avalon. As they approached the entrance, Arthur felt a flicker of surprise. The gatehouse was a formidable structure of deep red brick. Well, they've chosen the right material, at least, he murmured, more to himself than to Eleanor. He got out of the car and walked to the wall, running his hand over its surface. A Flemish bond, he noted. Nicely done. The atmosphere is convincing, he admitted, but his expression quickly reverted to its default skepticism. Still, it's just a facade. The real test is inside. At the ticket booth, the price made him frown. $75 per person? That's utterly exorbitant for a theme park. Or maybe it's a sign of their confidence in the quality, Eleanor suggested brightly. Or it's a sign of their confidence in the gullibility of tourists, he muttered, pulling out his wallet. As he paid, he discreetly took out his phone and opened a group chat with his colleagues from the Society for the Preservation of Ancient Buildings. I am about to enter an American replica of an English village. We'll report back on the inevitable butchery. Expect photographs. The replies were instantaneous. Haha, can't wait, Arthur. One wrote, a good laugh, I expect. Do send pictures of the plastic thatch. A grim smile touched Arthur's lips. Oh, I'll send plenty. Arthur, can't you just try to enjoy it? Eleanor pleaded, sensing his mood. One cannot enjoy a lie, he said coolly. Expectation is the mother of disappointment. It's far better to expect nothing from the outset. His eyes were cold with a professional contempt that was, in truth, a shield for his passion. He paused at the turnstiles, took a deep breath, and prepared to cast his expert, unforgiving eye upon the scene before him. All right, you colonials, he thought. Show me just how wrong you can get it. Passing through the gate, they were met with a grand entrance court. Eleanor gasped. Oh, Arthur, it's beautiful. But his face remained impassive. He walked to the nearest wall, touching the bricks with his fingertips. The brick is decent, he conceded, but this is just the overture. The moment we see the actual streetscape, the illusion will shatter. They walked down a wide path flanked by gardens, which were, to his irritation, filled with English roses. How quaint, he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. As if planting roses is all it takes to evoke England. The color arrangement is completely arbitrary. A true English garden is a calculated masterpiece of landscape theory, not just a jumble of pleasant flowers. Eleanor had already given up trying to reason with him. They came to the first proper building, whitewashed walls, a steep red-tiled roof, dark timber framing. It was a faithful representation of the Tudor style. Arthur stopped, his head tilted, his eyes narrowed. He was silent for a long moment. Well, Eleanor said, her voice full of hope. It's better than you expected, isn't it? He shook his head slowly. No. There's an incongruity. He stepped closer, examining the details with a jeweler's focus. Look at this window frame. The proportions are off. The mullions are too thick for a 16th century provincial style. Where? Eleanor asked, genuinely confused. It looks perfect to me. The ratio of the height to the width, he explained, gesturing with his hand. There's a subtle variance between early and late Tudor architecture. We're talking a matter of centimeters, but to a trained eye, it's glaring. And the paint on these timbers, it's too uniform. Authentic Tudor construction used pitch, which weathers to a soft, silvered gray, not this flat, modern black. Arthur, honestly, no ordinary person would ever notice such a thing. And that, he pronounced, is precisely the problem. It's an imitation that lacks a fundamental understanding of its subject. It mimics the form, but misses the essence. This is the very limit of American reproduction. He took a photo with his phone, a piece of evidence for the prosecution he was building in his mind. They began to walk along a cobbled lane that followed a gentle, winding canal. Small wooden boats drifted on the water, carrying tourists. The scene was undeniably charming, but Arthur's critical eye was relentless. "This cobblestone is all wrong," he said, looking down at his feet. Authentic English cobbles are uneven, worn smooth by centuries of cartwheels and footsteps. They have a weight, a gravity. This is all too new, too perfect. It has no memory. "But it is new, Arthur," Eleanor argued. "Of course it's new." "Precisely. And that is why it can never be real," he said, his voice cold. "The real thing has a patina that only time can grant. You cannot manufacture history." Across the canal, a massive windmill turned slowly in the breeze. "Oh, a windmill!" Eleanor exclaimed. Arthur simply stared. "Well, it is a symbol of the Low Countries, whose techniques heavily influenced English Fenland architecture," he mused, walking towards it. "So, its presence is plausible." As he drew closer, its scale became apparent. It was easily over 60 feet tall. "The dimensions," he murmured, a note of surprise in his voice, "are remarkably close to an authentic post-mill." But he quickly found fault. "The angle of the sails, however, is careless. A real miller would have set them more precisely to catch the wind. And the wood, the stain, is artificial. It hasn't captured the nuanced discoloration of decades of sun and rain." Eleanor said nothing. She knew it was pointless. Her husband was incapable of being pleased. They reached a central market square, bustling with families and couples taking photographs. The sound of children's laughter echoed off the building facades. "Look around," Eleanor said softly. "Everyone seems to be enjoying it." Arthur gave a short, bitter laugh. "That's because they don't know any better. For someone who has never seen the genuine article in Kent or Suffolk, I suppose this is a sufficient distraction." "That is an incredibly arrogant thing to say." Her voice was sharp with anger now. "I am merely stating a fact," he retorted. "As a preservationist, I have a duty to distinguish the authentic from the imitation." "A duty? No one asked you for your professional assessment, Arthur. This is our holiday." They found a bench and sat in a tense silence. Eleanor stared at her husband, her expression a mixture of frustration and sadness. "Arthur," she said, her voice softening, "can you not just let go? For one afternoon? We're on vacation together, and you've done nothing but complain." Arthur looked away. "I'm sorry, but my profession, my principles." "Is it a principle, or is it just stubbornness?" The question hung in the air, and he saw a flicker of truth in it that made him defensive. "It is a valid, expert critique." "But nobody here wants a critique," she said, her voice rising again. An elderly American couple on a nearby bench stood up to leave. As they walked away, the man said to his wife, "This new Avalon place really is something special, isn't it?" "Oh, it is," she replied. "I could come back a dozen times. We should bring the grandkids." Hearing them, Arthur muttered under his breath, the uninformed opinion of a tourist. Eleanor glared at him. "I heard that. You are being impossibly rude." She stood up and pulled at his hand. "Come on. We paid for the tickets. We're going to see the rest of it." He rose reluctantly. "Fine. But do not expect a change of heart." "Oh, believe me," she said, her voice laced with resignation. "I don't." They started walking again, heading toward a new section of the village. Arthur's eyes scanned every roofline, every doorway, searching for flaws to validate his conviction. "It's all wrong," he thought, reassuring himself. "The width of this canal is more suited to Bruges than East Anglia. The color of the water, it should be a murky, peaty brown, not this pleasant blue." He was no longer speaking to Eleanor, but to himself, reinforcing the walls of his own certainty. He had no idea that just around the next bend lay an architectural detail that would not just challenge his convictions, but take a sledgehammer to them. As they entered the next ward, the atmosphere shifted. The buildings were clustered more tightly together, giving the impression of a real, lived-in town. Arthur, however, saw only a more detailed counterfeit. "You see," he began, pointing at a building. "The bricklaying here is still not quite right. The mortar joints are too uniform for a pre-industrial construction. But as he spoke, he reached out and let his hand trail along the wall. And then he stopped. His words died in his throat. His expression changed from one of derision to one of utter disbelief. "This," he breathed, his voice a shocked whisper. "The texture of this brick." "What is it?" Eleanor asked, puzzled by his sudden change. He didn't answer. He was running his fingers over the surface, tracing the lines of the mortar. He felt the slightly uneven, sandy texture. He saw the subtle imperfections, the slight color variations from the firing process. The feel of this pointing "it can't be." He hurried to the corner of the building, examining the other wall as if searching for a trick. His fingers registered the minute pits and ridges on the face of the bricks. These were not modern, machine-made replicas. They had the unmistakable feel of old, handmade stock, weathered by centuries. His eyes darted around until he spotted a small, discreet brass plaque near the foundation. He knelt to read it. The bricks used in the construction of this ward were reclaimed from 18th and 19th century mills and warehouses in Derbyshire and Lancashire, England, and transported here for authentic reconstruction. Arthur's eyes widened. They shipped them over? From England. He touched the wall again, reverently this time, as if it were a holy relic. That's why it feels real. His heart began to beat faster. This wasn't just imitation. They were using authentic materials. "See," Eleanor said, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "They're using the real thing." But Arthur was still skeptical. "Perhaps only the bricks," he said, trying to regain his composure. "The rest is surely modern." They moved on, and a little further down the canal he saw a small, functional lock gate. He practically ran to it, kneeling to inspect its construction. The interlocking timbers, the iron fittings, the winding mechanism. He examined every component. After a moment, he spoke, his voice trembling slightly. "This is a mid-18th century design. A lock gate built to James Brindley's principles." He traced a joint with his finger. "This joinery, the hand-cut tenons, these are techniques lost to modern carpentry." "Is that impressive?" Eleanor asked. "Impressive," he echoed. "This design is obsolete. To recreate it, you would need access to historical archives, to original engineering drafts. And this isn't just a static display," he said, standing and looking at the whole structure. "It's a fully functional lock. The balance is perfect." Arthur felt a growing sense of confusion, a cognitive dissonance that rattled him. The theme park he had come to mock was built with a precision that bordered on the fanatical. It must be a coincidence, he told himself. They must have stumbled upon the right documents. But the next sight shattered that desperate rationalization completely. As they rounded a corner into a small square, Arthur stopped dead in his tracks. He was staring at a window on the second floor of a handsome merchant's house. "That's a Bristol-style oriel window," he whispered, stunned. He walked closer to the building. The exact design used on a row of houses on Broad Street in the 1760s. Eleanor couldn't see what was so special about it. "Is that rare?" "Rare." He turned to her, his eyes wild with excitement and disbelief. "Eleanor, that style is practically extinct in Britain. The original houses were destroyed in the Blitz. The only reason I know this design is because I studied the original architectural drawings in the Bristol City Archives for my dissertation." His hand was shaking. "I've only ever seen it on paper, and yet here it is, in the flesh." He touched the carved wooden support bracket. How? How could they possibly have recreated it so perfectly? A wave of vertigo washed over him. For 30 years, he had mourned the loss of these architectural marvels, sighing over faded photographs and brittle blueprints. "Arthur, look," Eleanor said, pointing. "There's a staff member. Let's ask him." A young man in a simple period costume was sweeping the cobblestones nearby. Arthur approached him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice unsteady. "Can you tell me about this building?" The young man smiled politely. "Of course, sir. This entire square was designed in consultation with architectural historians from the UK. This particular house was part of a 3-year research project." "Historians?" Arthur repeated, dumbfounded. "Yes, sir. Several architects and historians were brought over. They oversaw the entire design and construction process. The young man continued. The timber for that window, for example, was sourced from an estate in England that grows the same species of oak used in the 18th century. It was aged and then worked using period-appropriate hand tools. Even the tools? Arthur whispered. Yes, sir. Our artisans spent months learning historical woodworking techniques. They made several prototypes before they were satisfied they had achieved a historically accurate result. The young man's pride was evident. The philosophy of New Avalon is to convey British culture with absolute fidelity. We didn't want to create something that was only halfway there. Arthur felt as though the ground had fallen away from his feet. He could only manage a choked, "Thank you." After the staff member left, he stood frozen, staring at the window. Are you all right, Arthur? Eleanor asked gently. No, he said, his voice cracking. I'm not all right at all. I knew nothing. He looked up at the building again, his earlier contempt replaced by a profound and humbling awe. These Americans, he said, his voice filled with a strange reverence. They cherish our culture more than we do. Eleanor put a hand on his arm. Do you still think it's a cheap imitation? He shook his head slowly. No, he admitted, his voice hoarse. This is not an imitation. He paused, searching for the right word. This is a resurrection. But the day's revelations, the shocks that would fundamentally alter the course of his life, were far from over. He took a step forward, no longer an arrogant critic, but a pilgrim, ready to see, to learn, and to accept his own monumental ignorance. They continued deeper into the village, their journey now transformed into a quest for understanding. Arthur's eyes, once scanning for faults, were now wide with wonder, seeing not a replica but a painstakingly curated museum. Ahead of them rose the largest structure in the village, the Royal Hall, a magnificent building of pale stone and soaring windows. What is that? Arthur wondered aloud, his feet carrying him forward as if pulled by an invisible force. As they stood before its grand facade, he gasped. It can't be. It's so faithful. The building's exterior was an almost perfect match for the King's Wing at Hampton Court Palace, a section he knew intimately from his studies. The window placements, the decorative columns, the precise pitch of the roof, it was all staggeringly accurate. Incredible, he muttered. The actual palace was, of course, a national treasure, but detailed architectural plans of its more private sections were not widely available. How had they achieved this? At the entrance, a docent greeted them. Welcome to the Royal Hall. Arthur, his voice urgent, asked, Is this building a replica of a real English palace? Yes, sir, the docent replied. With the gracious permission of the Royal Collection Trust, we have faithfully recreated the lost Tudor apartments of Hampton Court Palace, which were demolished by Christopher Wren in the 17th century. The docent's words struck Arthur like a physical blow. Permission from the Royal Trust? Yes, sir. His Majesty King Charles himself, when he was the Prince of Wales, personally approved the project and the use of the historical plans. It was his belief that what was lost to time could be reborn through dedication. Arthur was speechless. Royal assent meant this wasn't just a copy. It was a sanctioned, recognized act of preservation. They stepped inside, and an even greater marvel awaited them. The vast hall had a floor of black and white marble tiles, glittering chandeliers hung from a coffered ceiling, and the walls were adorned with enormous tapestries and oil paintings. Arthur walked slowly, carefully, as if on holy ground. He knelt and examined the floor. This marble, it's Carrara, he whispered in astonishment. The real thing? Eleanor asked. Yes, he said, standing and gazing at the ceiling. And these chandeliers, they're Bohemian crystal, in the 18th century style. All of it authentic. His critical faculties had been replaced by pure, unadulterated admiration. They ascended a grand staircase to the second floor, into a gallery of rooms meant to represent royal living quarters. The walls were hung with Dutch-style landscape paintings popular in England at the time. Arthur moved from one to another, appreciating the artistry, until one particular painting caught his eye. It was a simple scene of a canal, a windmill, and a row of brick houses. He peered closer, a strange sense of familiarity prickling at the back of his mind. "Wait a second," he said, his heart starting to pound. This scene, it was a modest townscape, not a famous vista. But the specific bend in the canal, the way the stone bridge arched over the water, the tall, narrow house on the end with the crooked chimney. "This is the town where I grew up," he choked out. He had been born in a suburb of Coventry in the late 1960s. His childhood home was a small terraced house by a canal, a remnant of the city's industrial past. Every morning, he had looked out his bedroom window at that very scene. But that entire neighborhood, deemed a slum, had been completely demolished in the name of urban renewal in the early 1980s, replaced by a soulless council estate. He had often dreamed of seeing it again, a desire he had long ago accepted as impossible. "How?" he whispered, his hand trembling as he reached out toward the canvas. He read the small brass plaque next to the painting. This painting depicts a historic street in Coventry, demolished in 1982. It was recreated by artists from historical photographs and the collected memories of former residents. Tears welled in Arthur's eyes and began to stream down his face. "My town," he sobbed, the sound torn from deep within him. "My home, it's here." Eleanor rushed to his side, alarmed. "Arthur, what's wrong?" "This painting, Eleanor," he said, his voice breaking. "It's the street where I lived as a boy. The view from my window." "Oh my God," she whispered, her own eyes filling with tears. "But why? Why is it here, in America?" He read the plaque again, his vision blurred. As part of the New Avalon Project, researchers traveled throughout the United Kingdom to document disappearing townscapes, collecting photographs, architectural drawings, and oral histories. These records are preserved here as a testament to a shared heritage. He felt a profound, shattering sense of shame and gratitude. "The Americans," he wept. "They saved what we threw away." He stumbled to the gallery window and looked out. Below him was not a painting, but the village itself. The canal, the red brick houses, the stone bridge, the windmill turning in the distance. It was the same scene. The painting was not just a painting, it was a portrait of the world just outside the window. "They didn't just recreate the painting," he murmured in disbelief. "They recreated the entire town." Eleanor put her hand gently on his shoulder. "Arthur," she asked softly, "what was that you were saying earlier? About cheap imitations?" He shook his head, unable to speak for a moment. "This isn't an imitation," he finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. He looked out the window again. "This is preservation. The highest form of it. They preserved our lost culture for the future." He turned back to the painting and, in a gesture of profound respect, he bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered to the anonymous creators of this place, to the people of this country, to everyone who had kept his lost home alive. Just then, a senior docent approached them. "I see you've discovered our Coventry streetscape," she said with a kind smile. "It's one of our proudest achievements. In fact, during its construction, we discovered a tiny error." "An error?" Arthur asked. "Yes. The original blueprints were slightly off. Our masons had laid the mortar between the bricks 2 millimeters thicker than the historical reality. Our British consultants said no one would ever notice, that we shouldn't worry about it." The docent paused. "But our construction team decided to tear down the entire wall and rebuild it, to be 2 millimeters closer to the truth." 2 millimeters. An allowance well within professional tolerance. But for them, it was an unacceptable compromise. Arthur's legs gave out from under him, and he sank to his knees. "I knew nothing," he gasped, the words a confession of his own arrogance. Eleanor helped him up. "These people," Arthur said, tears flowing freely now, "they love England more than we do." His professional pride, his expert confidence, his lifetime of certainty, it all lay in ruins at his feet. Out in the palace courtyard, he collapsed onto a bench, utterly spent. Eleanor sat beside him in the quiet afternoon light. "We destroyed our own heritage for the sake of economic development," Arthur said, his voice hollow. "We called it progress, tearing down historic buildings for shopping centers and motorways. He looked up at the perfect blue Virginia sky. And now, you can hardly find the beautiful old England in England anymore. He continued, his voice trembling. As an architect, I've lamented that loss my entire life. I've raged against it. I thought it was gone forever. He took Eleanor's hand. But the Americans, they were different. They picked up the pieces we discarded, and they kept them safe here. He wiped his eyes. To think that another country would cherish our culture with such passion, with such dedication. Maybe that's just who Americans are at their best, Eleanor said softly. A nation of people from other places who remember the homes they left behind. Now I understand, Arthur said, a new resolve hardening in his voice. He stood up. I have to apologize. To the people of this country. To this place. They walked through the village again, but this time Arthur saw it through new eyes. He saw not just bricks and timbers, but a profound act of love. He saw a young groundskeeper tending to the buildings and stopped to speak with him. Excuse me, Arthur began. Do you feel a sense of pride working here? The young man, surprised, smiled. Yes, sir. A great deal of pride. Our job is to share the culture of Great Britain with Americans. And when visitors from here or from the UK come and feel happy, feel like they've connected with something real, well, that's the best reward there is. Thank you, Arthur said, bowing his head slightly. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for your work. Later, they watched an elderly woman tending the rose gardens. Are these gardens authentic to a particular English style? He asked. Oh, yes, she said, her face lighting up. The layout is based on traditional cottage gardens from the Cotswolds. In the spring, we have over 1 million bulbs bloom here. Daffodils, bluebells, tulips. 1 million. Arthur was astounded. It's a lot of work, she said, smiling as she pruned a rose bush. But we want our guests from Britain to feel like they've come home. I've never been to England myself, she added. But working here has made me fall in love with it. Thank you, Arthur said again, his voice thick with emotion. Truly thank you. Back at their hotel that evening, Arthur sat on the bed and opened his laptop. He found the group chat with his colleagues. The cynical message he had sent that morning was still there. He deleted it. Then he began to type a new one. My friends, today I have experienced the most profound professional humiliation of my life. I came to this place, the New Avalon Heritage Village, expecting to find a cheap American parody. I was wrong. Utterly and completely wrong. He attached a photo of the Royal Hall. Here, our lost culture, the pieces of our home that we ourselves destroyed, have been preserved in perfect form. The Americans love our history more than we do. The replies came in a flood of shock and curiosity. Are you serious, Arthur? That's incredible. Send more photos. He sent them pictures of the brickwork, the canal lock, the interior of the palace. He told them the story of the 2mm correction. The chat, once full of mockery, was now filled with awe. That's true craftsmanship. I want to go. This is real. He turned to Eleanor. When I get back to London, he said, his expression serious, I'm going to tell everyone. Tell them what? About the grace of this country, he said, and about the true meaning of preservation. Eleanor smiled. You've changed, Arthur. Yes, he agreed, a small smile of his own appearing. I have. Today in America, I learned an important lesson. Preserving culture isn't about clinging to the past. It's about keeping it alive for the people of the future. He looked out the window at the darkening sky. We thought that to progress, we had to discard our history. The Americans have shown us that you can cherish the past and build the future at the same time. As the sun set, casting a warm, golden light over the Virginia hills, Arthur held Eleanor's hand. The light was just like an English sunset. The shadows of two figures, humbled and transformed, merged into one. In the months that followed, Arthur's blog post about his experience, titled Finding England in America, went viral. It was shared thousands of times, sparking a conversation throughout the UK's heritage community. His lectures began to draw larger crowds, not just of architects, but of ordinary people hungry to hear his story. He spoke not as a detached expert, but as a passionate convert, showing slide after slide of New Avalon. "This is what they have taught us," he would say, his voice resonating with conviction. "That culture is a sacred trust, and that its stewardship is not limited by nationality." The number of British visitors to New Avalon surged. Elderly men and women wept openly on the Coventry Street, finding ghosts of their youth in the Virginia sun. A woman told a local reporter, "The lane my husband and I walked down on our first date is here. I feel like he's with me again." Another visitor, a man from Manchester, said simply, "I'm moved by the heart of these people. I can't think of another country on earth that would so lovingly preserve the heritage of another." Arthur himself returned many times, each visit a pilgrimage. He learned that the perfect recreation was not just mimicry, it was an act of profound respect, a bridge built across an ocean, connecting not just two nations, but the past to the future. New Avalon was not a theme park. It was a time capsule, a sanctuary where a piece of England that had died was given a new and vibrant life, a testament to the idea that the most important things are not defined by borders, but by the human heart's capacity to remember, to cherish, and to preserve.